All right, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, whatever it may be. Thanks for coming to the talk today. So before I get started, I want to say something so I don't forget, is that Stephanie from our executive unit asked me to mention to everybody to stop by our FBI booth today. So don't forget to visit the FBI booth while you're here. So I'm going to be talking to you today about a threat that we took action on, I don't know, maybe about 8 months ago. It's called Avalanche, and I think it's something that's probably familiar to you that work in cybersecurity, which is all of you, because it's a threat that's been around for many years. And I'm really happy that we were able to team up with our private sector partners and do something about it. I'm going to be talking to you about this threat, kind of some of the legal issues around it, some of the technical details about it, some of the ways that we approach these problems in law enforcement. But the thing that I hope you will all take away from my talk today is that the action that we took here, the good stuff that we did with this threat, would not be possible without your help. So I'm not here to tell you how the FBI solves problems on the internet. I'm not going to tell you that we're the savior of the internet. We're not. You all are. We all are, actually, is what it comes down to. If we're going to do something about these problems, if we're going to make the internet safer, make it secure, it's going to be a joint effort. It's government, it's private sector, it's academia. Everyone has a role to play, and I'm going to kind of be talking about that throughout the presentation. So I just kind of want to prepare you for that up front. Now, one thing I just have a little bit of a disclaimer that I want to mention, and that is that I'm going to be talking about some of the subjects of some of these cases. These are just that. They are defendants in these cases. Everyone's innocent until proven guilty. So these are the opinions of the FBI based on our investigations. But I don't want to infer anybody's guilt from the things I'm going to be talking about. Oh, and I hope you like the picture of Pittsburgh. So for those of you that have not been to Pittsburgh, it's not all steel mills in factories and things like that you might think it is. It's actually a very modern city, very progressive city, and I'm proud to live there. I'm a Buffalo native, so I have to deal with the whole Steelers thing while I'm there. But other than that, it's a pretty good place. So let's start off by talking about botnets. Botnets are a fun thing to work if you're in law enforcement. I'm really excited about botnets, which is kind of weird. But I mean, I've been working botnets probably for about 10 or 15 years. And the neat thing about botnets is that they touch on all sorts of different criminal activity. So if you're investigating a botnet, you have the opportunity to be looking at something like denial of service attacks, spam, credential hijacking, banking Trojans, proxy bots, all sorts of different things that botnets touch on. So if you're in law enforcement, I would say botnets are exciting, and think about opening botnet cases if you're in law enforcement. And if you're in private sector, I mean, you guys know the damages that these things cause. So I want to talk a little bit about how we approach the botnet problem in the FBI. So, and I want to start off by saying that our ultimate goal is to reduce the threat that these particular botnets and malware pose. But I want you to understand we do more than just arrest the bad guys. So we have a multi-pronged approach to addressing this threat. I think the tools that we have on law enforcement as far as identifying the criminals and taking them out of action, that's important, but there's other things that we can do as well. So the three-pronged approach that we like to take with botnets is to neutralize the actors, so to find those people that are operating these things, take them off the playing field so that they can't continue to do the damage that they do, and put them in jail or whatever. But the other things that we can do is we can share intelligence with private sector, and then private sector can do mitigation. Maybe private sector can develop a technical solution, right? If we call something a threat and private sector can find out a way to block that threat so that it's no longer causing damage, I mean, they've effectively defeated it. And it's not really necessary for us to come in and do our thing on the law enforcement side. And then the last thing that I think we can do is kind of like the sexy thing that everybody likes to talk about, which is a botnet takedown. So sometimes we can, by working with our private sector partners, do some type of technical operation, some type of intervention, where we go and we take this threat away from the criminals and direct it somewhere safe and then do mitigation. So the strategy that we follow with this, our overall botnet strategy, really starts with private sector. So I told you a few minutes ago that I was going to say how important private sector plays in helping us with our cases. They're really at the top of this thing. So we're looking to private sector. I'm looking to my private sector partners to tell me what the threats are. I'm not going to come to you and say, hey, here's what's causing you to lose money on your networks because it's damaging your customers. I don't need to do that. You all know that, right? You guys are down in the trenches. You're fighting the fights every day. So what I want is I want you to tell me what those threats are. I want you to tell me what's damaging your customers, what's harming your customers, what's damaging your business, what's causing you to lose money. What are those big threats out on the internet? And then what we do is we look at that and we say, hey, what can we do about this from the government side? How can we work with our private sector partners to bring in the tools that we have, such as legal process, investigations, things like that, going after those bad guys like I talked about earlier. What can we do to help with that problem? And then we work together on it, and we share intelligence, and we hopefully reduce the threat. I'm just going to give you a couple examples of how we tried different parts of that puzzle of putting things together to go after these botnet threats. So Core Flood was one of the first pieces of malware that we went after and that we did a takedown on. This was back in like 2010, 2011, was the guys working out of our New Haven office. Just awesome stuff that they did there. It was kind of provocative at the time, at least inside of the government, because we had never done something like this. We had never taken over a botnet and neutralized it, and everybody was afraid that we were going to blow up the internet or something like that, So there was a lot of discussions on the policy level, a lot of discussions with lawyers. Tom, is everything going to be okay? Yeah, everything's going to be okay. Don't worry. Just give me this button to destroy bots. It'll all be good. But we did it, and it was very well received, and it was effective, and kind of paved the way for us doing more actions like this. Now, with those three things that I talked about, arrest the bad guys, do a technical operation, do mitigation, those three prongs to our way of attacking botnets. We did 2 of them with Core Flood. Ideally, the best situation, I think, is that you do all 3. But with Core Flood, we couldn't get our hands on the criminals, okay? So we had tried, but the country they were located in would not do anything about it. So we were like, okay, this thing's sitting out here. It's causing millions of dollars worth of damage. It's about 800,000 bots in size or something like that. Let's do something about it. So we just decided to do a technical operation. And now an example of where we did all 3 of those and it worked out real well was with Game Over Zeus, which was in 2014. We went after the criminals. We did a technical operation against the bot, and we did mitigation to reduce the numbers. And that was very successful. I think we started with like 300,000 infected computers, and we got down to like 5,000. Game Over Zeus was interesting too, because it was one of these pieces of malware that people are like, you guys can't take this thing down. It's too complex. It's too technically advanced. And I actually had resigned myself to that for about 2 years. It wasn't until one of our partners, private sector partners, came to us and he said, hey, I've got a way for you guys to take this thing down. I've figured it out. Here are the things that you need to attack on it. Yeah, it's got 3 layers, a proxy layer, a peer-to-peer layer, and a DGA. But here's the way you can go after all of those. And he basically laid out the plan for us, and then we put that plan into action with court orders and legal process. So that brings up another point I want to say, which is to quote Shakespeare and say, "Make you a sword of me." So what I want to say is that us in government, for those of you that have really good ideas on how to do things in private sector, you've identified vulnerabilities out there in these threats, and you maybe want to go out and take the threat down yourself, but you're like, I don't know, it might not be quite legal for me to go out and attack the threat in this type of way. We can make it legal for you to do that. We can take your good ideas and formulate them into a sound legal plan that we present to a judge. And so basically what I'm saying is that we can take your good ideas for reducing these threats, doing takedowns and things like that, and we can turn them into action. So I'm going to make a plea to all of you on that. So please don't be afraid to come to us with your ideas. We want to hear them. And if you do have a solution to one of these threats, we want to see how we can put it into a legal framework and make it happen. So let's talk about Avalanche, because that's really what I'm here to talk about today. And I'm going to talk about Avalanche and one of the pieces of malware that was hosted through Avalanche, if we have enough time. That's called GhostNIM, so it'll kind of be a bonus if we have enough time. So Avalanche isn't a botnet, right? I just talked for 15 minutes about botnets, and now I'm going to tell you that Avalanche isn't a botnet. It's actually an infrastructure for enabling botnets, and it was a very complex system. It was controlled by two administrators. One of them is someone named Flux, who we were able to arrest, and the other one is somebody that we haven't identified yet. It's been around since 2010, and it really was a kind of a service that Flux and his co-conspirator provided to the different criminals to make botnet operation easy for them, to make it easy for a malware author to deploy a botnet. Kind of a trend that we're seeing with all this stuff, right, is that things that had like a lot of different steps that were hard to do for the criminals 5 years ago, it's now like almost provided like as like a software as a service type thing, or some type of online service that they can go and pay somebody else to do for them. Now, before I go any further, I just want to give credit where credit's due. So I'm up here telling you about how cool Avalanche is and all the awesome things that we did with it, but I didn't have anything to do with it. I'm just like a management guy who takes credit for other people's work, okay? So I want to tell you about the people that actually did the work in this case. So first and foremost are the agents at our Pittsburgh field office. They have a really top-notch cyber squad there in Pittsburgh, and they were the ones that were behind this on the FBI side. Also was the German state and German federal police. They were the ones that pushed us forward on this case. They had developed the case. They had come to us and they said, hey, we have a way to go after Avalanche, let's do it. The Ukraine police played a vital role, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But then many of our private sector partners, they were really crucial to this. So first is Shadow Server. Shadow Server kind of did all the technical stuff behind the scenes to enable us to sinkhole all these different malware families that were running over this Avalanche infrastructure. Another German company called Fraunhofer, they figured the whole thing out. They're the ones that mapped out, here's Avalanche, here's the dozen or so pieces of malware that use Avalanche every day, and here's where their command and control points are. So it's like Fraunhofer that kind of laid out that technical information for us. Something called the Registry of Last Resort, which is something new. You guys may have not heard about this, but it's something that was just spun up. This is like Shadow Server. It's a nonprofit organization, and it's a registry for those of us that are the good guys, those of us that are fighting abuse, doing research, and in law enforcement can use to park malicious domains, okay? And they kind of make the whole domain management thing easy. National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. I'm going to talk about that in a few seconds, so not too much on that right now. US CERT played a really vital role in this takedown. They published the information that private sector could then use to help mitigate the threat. So if you Google US CERT and Avalanche, you'll see the page that they put up where they described what the operation was about. They described the threat, and they list the antivirus products that you can use to remediate this threat. So, and this is something that we've heard over and over again from people that do mitigation, people in private sector. They say, hey, when you guys go out and you take down one of these botnets, make sure you have a solution in place so that people can remove it for their systems, because people read about it in the press and they call their ISPs or they call their help desks or whatever and they say, hey, what if I have this? How do I fix it? So we want to make sure that there's a solution in place, and that's where the AV companies come in line. So next is the AV companies. We worked closely with all of the antivirus companies, the ones that we have working relationships with, we worked with, and they developed products that could detect and remove the different malware that Avalanche uses. So things like Norton's Power Eraser, McAfee Stinger, Microsoft Safety Scanner. The different products are the things that they were able to provide for us to help remediate the threat. The registries played a vital role. You're going to see why pretty soon. And of course, you know, the ISPs who are critical to mitigation. So I told you I'd say a few words about the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. I could give a whole presentation about this, but I'm going to keep it to like 15 seconds. It's where I work. It's where I'm deployed to. It's a nonprofit organization. It's not government. It doesn't belong to any one private sector company. It's neutral ground where all of us can come together and work together under the same roof. So NCFTA is a place for government, private sector, well, government law enforcement, private sector, and academia to come together and work on cyber problems. And when you come in there, you're not going into government space, so you don't have to worry about disclosure stuff. You're not going into a competitor space, so you don't have to worry about your proprietary information going out the door. Just provides a good environment for us all to work in. Enough about that. Okay, so let's take a look at Avalanche and what Avalanche was all about. As I said, it was a complex system, many different layers to it, global in its nature. You can see the global nature to it by looking at some of the different countries that were involved with it. I think the thing that I take away from this slide is the complexity of some of these cybercrime operations and the lengths that the criminals will go to make it work. When you look at this, when you look at something like this infrastructure for Avalanche, we're not talking about some pimply-faced 17-year-old in his mother's basement, right? That's not the type of cyber criminal we're talking about here. We're talking about businessmen. This is a business to them, and they build these complex systems that have redundancy, that have countermeasures, all these different things built into them so that they can keep these systems running, because that's putting money in their pockets, lots of money. Just for example, if you look at where the Canadian flag is, that one of the things that the server in Canada did, it would check the different blacklists, so spam house and stuff like that, and make sure that as Avalanche deployed new domain names or maybe set up new proxy IP addresses for its customers to use, that those weren't on the spam house block list. So it's just kind of like they had countermeasures built into it and everything. Why was the operation so complex? Well, like lots of malware today, everything uses a DGA of some sort, domain names all over the place. Avalanche did all that. It provided those domain names for its customers to use, but there was over 800,000 of them. So it was a tremendous amount of domain names. And, we've faced that problem in the past. With Game Over Zeus, we had hundreds of thousands of domains that we were having to deal with by virtue of a DGA, domain name generation algorithm. But with Game Over Zeus, it was nice because they were only spread across 7 TLDs. And I think 6 of them were in the US, so it made it real easy. Well, along comes this, and this thing is spread across 53 different TLDs. So you can see some of them right there. It's not just your comms and your nets. It's the TLDs that are all over the world. And when you put these different TLDs on the map, you're talking about dealing with over 40 different countries. So now our plan to take this over doesn't just involve us serving legal process in the US, it involves us serving legal process internationally. So I think that was not by accident that this was done. I think this was a strategic move by the criminals who are running this to add another layer of complexity into this to make it not acceptable to law enforcement intervention. So I was really proud that we were able to overcome this complexity and go after all of these domain names, which we did. We seized all of these and we redirected them to the sinkhole. Okay, so I've been talking about how Avalanche was a system for running malware. It basically provided a hosting platform for the criminals to use. Here's some of the malware families that run over Avalanche. And as I said, if we have time, I'm going to talk about Goznim a little later on. Now, one of the cool things when you're looking at these different malware threats, whether it's a particular piece of malware or whether it's something like Avalanche, bulletproof hosting, is that you guys all figure this stuff out in advance, right? And you blog about it, and you write papers about it, and things like that. And usually you come up with a name for something. So at some point, somebody saw this thing happening, and they're like, "I'm going to call this Avalanche," okay, for whatever reasons. Probably had something to do with the different layers and the trickle-down effect and stuff like that. So it's always real cool when you can go into the criminal forums where the bad guys hang out and see what they're calling it, okay? And or see them talking about it. So what I have here is a post, a message that was posted to the online criminal forum direct connection from a few years ago. It's okay, so it's in Russian, and you guys are like, why is he showing me this Russian? Okay, here's the translation of it. So here's the guys who are offering this. This is Flux, who's posting a message offering Avalanche for sale, or access to Avalanche. And look at some of the interesting things that he says about this service that he's offering. Bulletproof hosting, high uptime, all the bots are on high-speed uplinks. Redirect, he says it's ideal for hosting Trojans. Proxy traffic from your bots on your server. You run the server, we do all the other stuff. We deal with the abuse complaints. You don't have to worry about that. Talks about email and spam, says that you can, domains are all bought from Chinese registers. So some of the, just the ways that they're trying to market this thing. Yeah, by the way, something that I do want to mention, this message was posted to a criminal forum. It's called Direct Connection. There's lots of different criminal forums out there. I think we all know about them. Things like Exploit.in, Verified, all these different forums that are out there. So, something I feel very strongly about, okay, and that is this: the criminals are really excellent at collaborating. These guys have taken collaboration to a new level. It's one of the reasons I think they're so successful at what they do, committing cyber crimes, because they go into these different forums. They'll say, "Hey, I wrote a piece of malware, but I need some way to deploy it. I'm looking for a spammer to help me spam it out. And I'm looking for a bulletproof hoster to do my bulletproof hosting for me, to run the back-end servers," which is what this Avalanche thing is. So these guys are really good at collaborating. We need to collaborate as well as they do. That's why I talk about this stuff all the time. That's why I come to places like this and tell you that, it's not just FBI that's going to fix this problem. It's going to be FBI and private sector and other people. It's because we all need to collaborate on this. We need to collaborate as good as they do. And until we do, we're always going to be losing the battle. So think about that, and think about how you guys can collaborate amongst yourselves. And I know you're all really good at it, but think about collaborating with us on government too, because that's what we need to do. This is what we need to do to get the upper hand in this fight. Okay, off the soapbox. So a couple different components of Avalanche that really helped us move the case forward. So we had some components that were here in the US, which is always awesome. So in November of 2015, we discovered that the admins were using a Jabber server in Moldova. And this was basically their private Jabber server that they would use to communicate with their different customers. And they also, on this same server, they had the domain name registration panel, so that if you were a customer coming to them with your new botnet that you want them to deploy and run for you, this is where you would register the domains that it was going to use. Again, you as the botnet operator didn't have to worry about any of that stuff of, how do I set up the DNS, where the domain's going to be parked, what IP addresses are they going to be pointing to. These guys took care of that for you, but they had a control panel so you could put in the information. That whole thing, I don't know why these guys did this, but that whole thing they moved to the US in 2016. About a little over a year later. And we were able to see that because at the time we had a what we call a pen trap and trace on the server in Moldova, which what that is that means that it's kind of like it's just in and out it's sockets, okay? So we're seeing the connections on either side. We're not seeing content, okay, because that's like another level that we have to go to as far as court orders and justification. But we are able to see what IP addresses are connecting to what other IP addresses. Don't know what the connections are about, but we see it going. So all of a sudden we see all the traffic start to shift to this VPS in the US, and that was awesome. So we were able to get search warrants on that server because it was here in the US, and really came up with some great information. We identified the administrators or saw what email addresses they were using. We also were able to see the buddy list for the Jabber server with the 200 customers of this, which was great. And that's what the domain name registration panel looked like, which was also on that server. And this is where the customers would register their domains. So all of this led to us being able to get what's called a Title III. And a Title III is basically law enforcement talk for a wiretap. Okay, so this is, I talked about getting a court or a pen trap and trace court order that allows us to see source and destination connections, but nothing else. The Title III allows you to see everything. It allows you to see content. And this was really, really when we blew the case open. So We based that on the servers being in the U.S. We based that on the subjects that were using it. We had the buddy list, and we knew that we had criminal histories for these guys, at least for their personas. So that helped us justify it. In the Western District of Pennsylvania, which again I said Pittsburgh was prosecuting this case. So Western District of Pennsylvania was the judicial court district where all the actions happening on the legal front. We had victims there, Naimane and Corbat. And so we were basically able to tie all this together and really got some good information. So here's an example. Here's one of the chats that we pulled off the server from the Title III that we are running. Top is the original Russian posting. Below that is translation. And he's basically telling people on there what they do. He's outlining the criminal activity right there, is that they offer a fast flux service. I think you guys all know that, fast fluxing. It's just been the thing like for the last 10 years, not only changing the IP addresses, but also changing the name servers to kind of hide things and make it difficult to take them down. Basically saying, all you have to do as one of my customers is just get yourself a server at any data center you want. You go and you get a server, and we do the rest for you. We set up the domains, we set up the proxying, we set up the different layers of obfuscation. So this is a really good piece of evidence in our case against Flux. Now, who is Flux, according to the FBI? Flux is Kapkanov, and he was arrested in the Ukraine in December of this just past December of 2016. He took a shot at the Ukraine police when they were coming through the door. So anyways, cyber criminals can be badasses, okay? Don't just think of them as like cute little fuzzy, hackers or whatever. I mean, these guys can be pretty bad, especially when they're making a lot of money. And I think the fact that this guy took a shot at the police is an example of this. They chased him out onto his balcony. He tried to escape. He went out through his balcony and started walking along the side of the house there. You can see their special ops team there is now out on his balcony, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but he made it over to the neighboring apartment, and that's them arresting him. I have a cool video of this. We'll see if this plays or not. Let's give it a shot here.
Говори. Объект подконтрольный.
Okay, so that's a video that the Ukraine police made. So thank them for doing that. They actually did a great job with this case, and we were just thrilled to be working with them. The other thing I'm hoping you're taking away from all this stuff, I've really been preaching the cooperation that I think we need to have between private sector and law enforcement, but it's really international cooperation as well is absolutely crucial to the success of these cases. The bad guys are never in your country. They're always somewhere else when you're investigating this stuff. So we do a lot to promote outreach with our international partners. We have great relationships with them. They have a great relationship with us, I like to think. And we try to help each other. There's we're all from different countries. There's borders and there's geopolitical stuff and all that other things, but we're all police at the end of the day, and we're all fighting the good fight here. And so it's really important for us to be able to work with our international partners, whoever they are. So as promised, we have enough time here. I'm going to get into one of the pieces of malware that was running through Avalanche and talk a little bit about that. So that's Goznim. Goznim is a banking Trojan. Again, something I think is probably familiar to you. It's been around for a couple of years, has caused a lot of damage. We believe it's responsible for infecting tens of thousands of victims, and we have 50 million in losses attributed to it just in the U.S. in 2016. So it's costing people a lot of money, this threat. We were able to tie this into Avalanche through some things I'll talk to you about in a little bit. But our guys in Pittsburgh worked this case, one, because it was tied to Avalanche, but also because we had a victim not here in Pittsburgh. I'm in Las Vegas, for Christ. Okay, in Pittsburgh we had a victim who was able to provide us with some good evidence to help us have venue on this case. They had the phishing email, and they had the malicious attachment, and a forensic exam of their computer. We were able to determine this is Goznim, and start tracing it back from there. So this is basically what Goznim does. This is how it works. It's delivered through malicious spam, through malicious emails. It infects the computers, and then that's where Avalanche comes in, and Avalanche starts doing its thing. So the first thing would be that it would communicate with this domain, nylon.com, for example, but it was a fast fluxing domain that would then be fast fluxed back to allow connections back to a second level server, and then back to a third level server, and then ultimately through to the C2 and the control panel. We did a MLAT request, mutual legal assistance request, to Bulgaria because we traced this back to someone named Krashimir Nikolov. They executed a search on his residence. They allowed the FBI to be there. So our guys from Pittsburgh went out to Bulgaria to be there for the interview and the arrest of this subject. And we collected some good evidence from it. I'm going to talk a little, if you're wondering, like, how did we tie this guy to Goznim? It's actually kind of interesting. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And we were able to have him arrested and then ultimately extradited to the U.S., which, by the way, is like something we like to do. It's always like when we have victims here in the U.S., if we're working a case on the side of the FBI and like you guys are victims, we always like to be able to bring the subjects here to the U.S. so that they can be prosecuted here in the U.S., but it doesn't have to be the case. If they can be prosecuted overseas, that's just as well. I mean, our goal here, if you think back to that model of arrest, mitigate, and technical operations, we want to take them out of action somehow. That's one of the things that we want to do. So this is the control panel for Goznim. So Nikolov, as the operator, he would go to this control panel and he would see what Goznim infected computers, what victims, what they were doing, logging into their bank accounts, and then he could insert himself into that transaction and obtain their username, their password. It allowed for a man-in-the-middle attack against two-factor authentication. So, remember when TFA came out and we were like, okay, no more phishing, it's not going to be a problem anymore. Well, these guys quickly found a way around that, right? Is they just kind of insert themselves in the middle of that end user interaction with their bank, and they steal that second factor and use it themselves. He was careful, but not careful enough. He logged into this panel using a proxy most of the time, but on one occasion the proxy failed, and the way he had it configured on his computer, it just took a route around the proxy. And so he connected to this once from his home IP address in Bulgaria, and that's how we were able to track it back to him. So I guess we got lucky on that one. I don't know. So there he is. This is Nikolov. In Pennsylvania, they got a 6-count indictment against him: conspiracy, unauthorized access to computers, usual stuff that we use, and bank fraud as well, because there's a banking Trojan. And he was extradited to the U.S. So he showed up in December. And he's been there ever since, and he's working his way through the legal system in the U.S. So overall, just to summarize, Avalanche, I think it was a huge success. It was a success because it involved not only law enforcement, but it involved international law enforcement. It involved private sector partners, both here in the U.S. and abroad, and it was everybody working together to reduce this threat. And as a result, this threat is now gone, and we're in the mitigation phase of it right now. It got some good press. That always makes the FBI happy. And that's it. So I'll take any questions that you guys might have. Yes, sir. Okay, the question was, do criminals ever tell us later why they would move a server to the U.S.? Yeah, because you would think that would be intuitive not to do that. I mean, sometimes they tell us why they do things. We don't know why they did it in this case. It could have just been maybe they got good bandwidth or something like that. I mean, in general, they like to have as much of their services near where the victims are for performance reasons, you know? So, you know, we see we're often surprised by stuff that's here in the U.S. because we're like, well, why didn't they just put that, you know, someplace out of reach? And sometimes it comes down to performance issues and things like that. So, how about the gentleman in the blue and white shirt there?
Do you get a sense?
Sorry, and there's somebody actually playing by the rules and talking into the microphone. But this is Black Hat, man. We're breaking all the rules here. Let me get this guy's question first, and I'll get right to you. So, yes, sir.
Do you get a sense whether these guys are independent or if they're working for someone else in the crime syndicate?
We think they're part of a crime syndicate. Organized crime is involved with this now. There's just too much money in it. And I mean, this will generate more revenue than drugs and prostitution and all the other stuff, you know, breaking people's kneecaps, all the other stuff that you traditionally think of organized crime as wanting to be involved with. So when we investigate these, that's what we're looking at is the structure behind it and who are the people that are profiting off of it. So yes. Yes, sir, the gentleman that's in back by the microphone there.
I want to ask about your collaboration statements. I like to watch guys like Project Mayhem online who are, I assume, what you would call a vigilante, taking action as a private citizen against these kind of hackers. Can you walk us through the process of how a private party would approach the government to make a more legal attack on these kind of entities who are stealing our money? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Excellent question. So first off, get in touch with us. And the best way to do that is through your local FBI office. You can always contact me if you want to. My email address is right up on the slide, I think. But I would prefer that you first went to your local FBI office. And we have 56 offices across the country in each of the judicial districts that we have. If you go to fbi.gov and click on Contact Us, I think you can like put in your zip code or something like that, and it'll tell you what your closest field office is. So reach out to them, make friends with the cyber squad there. They're going to love to hear from you, right? Because of all this stuff that we've just been talking about, and that's the way to start it up. And probably what's ultimately going to happen is that you're going to get put in touch with someone like myself, who's part of headquarters. Even though I'm in Pittsburgh, long story, but you're going to be put in touch with someone like myself, and we're going to start thinking about, how can we do this from a legal standpoint? So. Yes, we have someone over there, yes.
Hi, I was wondering if you could comment about some of the countries that you have the biggest challenges with, cooperating with, and if you see that changing anytime in the near future.
Yeah, I'll take the positive approach to that, and that is that we're getting more and more cooperation. There's really very few countries that we don't get cooperation out of. I mean, if you look at that list of domains that I showed earlier, they were spread across the globe. So, even if there's a country that you might think, I think there's tension between that country and the U.S., and I bet they don't work together. We find ways to work together on situations like this. We can go through third parties, maybe some friendly country like the UK or Germany has a good relationship with them, and we're able to work it out that way. So we find ways to make this work, but it is a challenge. But I think it's a problem we're always going to be facing, are these geopolitical issues. And it's something we have to find ways to work around. So, yes, sir.
Yes, a question and a comment. A comment about collaboration with the underground. They do, and we need to better. Yes, agreed. But the question is, when you found the Jabber servers, did you initially take those down and then see them pivot with the new Jabber servers and a new infrastructure, and that led to more tracking of that investigation, or was it really just monitoring to look at communications and comms to build a better operational profile?
So we with respect to the Jabber servers that we found and that we got the wiretap going on, no, we kept those up so that we could continue to collect the intel, but we did take them down when we did the takedown. So and that's something. It's always like that's something you have to weigh and balance, because there's all these different technical things out there that you can do to attack the criminals' stuff and like degrade their capabilities. but it might be a good source of evidence. So maybe you don't want to attack it right away, but if it's harming somebody, then maybe you should attack it right away. So it's kind of like something you have to weigh and think, well, I'm gonna let this thing go and I'm gonna monitor it, but I'm gonna say now I'm just gonna do that for like 6 months or something like that. And if we haven't arrested them at the end of that period, and it's not always 6 months, it might be like 1 month or it might be like 2 years, I don't know. But I mean, you make that decision and you say, if we haven't arrested them by the end of this period, then we're going to do something. We're going to take some action. So, yeah. Yes, sir, in the white shirt here. And I'll get to you guys in a second, sorry.
So on the topic of cooperation,
Yeah.
have you seen any improvement in the privacy relationship with Russia? There was press reports, I believe, in the middle of last year.
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, with respect to countries that we may have had difficulty collaborating with, such as Russia, have I noticed any change now? Is it getting better? No, I can't answer that question. I don't want to get into answering that question because it's more of I think a political type question, and I want to keep this more cybersecurity stuff. But so apologies for that. Yes, sir, gentlemen.
So you've been doing takedowns for a while now, and I don't think we can deny it's turning into a bit of a game of cat and mouse. So you come up with techniques, criminals respond, get better. And do you think we're going to end up at a point where it's a stalemate? The criminals' techniques are too advanced, we can't take them down. And if so, what are the next steps after that?
Yes. So it is like an arms race right now. I mean, that's what we've seen. If we go back and, like I showed you core flood, that was the first one we went after. That was like pretty straightforward. There was 13 C2 servers that it was using that were all referenced by like something like 23 different domain names. I mean, it was 23 domain names. It wasn't 800,000. And it was pretty straightforward. And so what we've seen from core flood, we went to like kind of that model, static C2s with a static list of domain names, to stuff that was fast fluxing. And then we started seeing DGAs come in where like it would generate, thousands, hundreds of thousands of domains. Yeah, so it's an arms race with the criminals. But it's something that with the help of our private sector partners, we can stay ahead of it, because it seems whatever these guys build into their malware to protect it and defend it, someone on the good side always figures out a way around it. So, but yeah, it is getting more complex. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, Tom, congrats, of course, and thanks for the talk. Just a good question at the end of the day, because I'm law enforcement too, so at the end of the day, it's always interesting to find out, are you able to lose some words on like those two guys you have now safe and sound in your own jurisdiction? How much are they going to get conviction-wise, or is that still somehow open? I mean, I would understand if you kind of lose some words, but if you can, would be great.
Yeah. So here in the U.S., yeah, the computer crime laws, the punishment, the sentencing, is determined on the amount of damage that the crime has caused. So it's really important for us whenever we start one of these cases is to, and this is frustrating to some people. I know it's frustrating to you in private sector, because you'll come to us, you'll be, Tom, we just got like hit by this big threat, and like pretty soon the question's going to be, okay, well, how much money did you lose? We always want to know how much money that you lost, because the way the laws are written is that we have to demonstrate that money was lost, and that really determines what the severity of the sentence will be. But it ranges anywhere from a couple years up to 10 years in prison. It really depends on the crime, the number of victims, and the damage that they've done. And maybe those laws aren't so bad, right? Because it causes us to focus on the stuff that's really causing harm, not just like the low-hanging fruit or the little fish. And I think that's so the laws are kind of a pain, but I mean, they have that effect. Yeah. Yes, sir.
One of the challenges in the private sector, my experience with the FBI in particular, is as an organization, you have a responsibility to look after, you have a responsibility to our patients. Sometimes you have issues where,
Right. Yeah, so it's a good question. It's something it's kind of gets into this analysis that I was speaking to earlier that we have to do is, the benefit against the harm of keeping something up and running. I can tell you that, and I don't know the specifics of the particular case that you were involved with, but yeah. Yeah. Right. And what I tell people is that if it's harming you, stop it. Just stop it. I mean, I can't tell you to keep something up that's harming you or harming your customers. I can tell you what the benefit of that may be, and if you're like, okay, well, this isn't really hurting us too bad, we'll just leave this up so the FBI can arrest this guy. That's fine, but we should never be telling you, oh, you have to keep this up and running. And I would never tell that to somebody. So again, I'm not familiar with your particular circumstances, but really. We are not in the position to say that. It's not for us to say that, unless it was like a life or death situation and we need you to keep the server up because someone's been kidnapped and we need to find them or something like that. But otherwise, it really should be a decision based on what's the harm being caused, how long can we tolerate that, and will there be some good that comes out of it. And that's why I think it's really important for these relationships to be more than just stuff like this where we're coming to this meeting and talking. It's like the stuff that we do at NCFTA where we're sitting down and we're working side by side and we're friends with each other and we know each other so that we can have those those really difficult conversations with each other on this stuff and understand what's good is going to come out of this, because what you should be saying is that, okay, if I'm going to put some risk in place to my business, what good is the FBI going to do? And we should be willing to give you updates on that. If we're going to say, yeah, well, we're going to investigate it for a couple of years and maybe do something at the end of that years, that's something you need to know because that's going to factor into your decision. Whereas opposed to if we can say, no, actually next week we're going to arrest this guy, so can you please keep it up for a week? So really stresses the need for these relationships and for these to be working relationships that we have. Yes, thanks. Yes, sir, David.
Some of the options the private sector could have, maybe diverting traffic off their network, from being at risk, but also lets the FBI do their investigation.
So thank you, David. So the question was, am I out of time? Okay, so we're going to go across the hall here if you have any other questions. But let me answer David's questions first. I don't know, David. Do you want to answer that question? Because we'll talk about it over there. Because I think the best thing is to we'll find a way to make that happen. If you're being attacked and you want to share the traffic with us, we'll find a way to make that happen. That's the bottom line. So thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.